Good evening, everyone. For those of you who do not know, I'm David Tweedy in the Department of Economics, and I am exceptionally pleased to introduce our speaker for this evening, the Henry M. Lewis Professor of Management and Professor of Economics at the Johnson Graduate School of Management at Cornell University, Robert H. Frank. I first met Bob when I took his price theory course back when I was still a graduate student. His course was among the best that I took while I was in graduate school, and it remains heavily influential on my own teaching to this day. I am forever grateful to Bob for the insights that I gained and the depths of understanding that I reached both through his course and through following his work since. Beyond his contributions to my own education, Bob in addition served as a Peace Corps volunteer in rural Nepal. After completing graduate degrees in statistics and economics from the University of California at Berkeley, he began his career at Cornell. He served as the chief economist for the Civil Aeronautics Board. Incidentally, for anyone who appreciates the fact that when a flight is overbooked, what do airlines do these days? They offer travel vouchers to encourage people to volunteer to take the next flight instead of what used to happen, which was the last people who arrived were ones who would bump the next flight. Bob had a role in implementing that during his time at the Civil Aeronautics Board. He is the former president of the Eastern Economics Association. He is the co-director of the Paduano Seminar in Business Ethics at New York University School of Business, and his economic view column appears monthly in the New York Times. His research has focused on rivalry and cooperation in economic and social behavior, and has been published in the American Economic Review, in Econometrica, the Journal of Political Economy, and in many other leading journals. Books that he has published, including Choosing the Right Pond, Passions Within Reason, and What Price the Moral High Ground, address topics such as human preference for status within the workplace, the long-term strategic value of having emotions of concern for others, preference people have for work that is morally rewarding, and human desire to retaliate against injustice, even when it violates narrow economic rationality to do so. He also has published The Economic Naturalist, which answers a variety of intriguing questions from everyday life using basic economic principles. He additionally has published books on arms races that can occur with economic behavior. These include Falling Behind, Luxury Fever, and The Winner-Take-All Society. Luxury Fever was named to the Knight Ridder Best Books list for 1999, and The Winner-Take-All Society, co-authored with Philip Cook, was included on Business Week's list of the 10 best books of 1995, and was named a notable book of the year by the New York Times. His books have been translated into 18 languages. Tonight's discussion will be focused on his most recent book, The Darwin Economy: Liberty, Competition, and the Common Good. This talk is sponsored by the Department of Economics and the Genevieve Patterson Perry Endowment for the Study of Economics. The Perry Endowment, created by former Whitman President Louis B. Perry to honor his wife, Genevieve Patterson Perry, was created as such. Genevieve Perry was educated as an economist at the University of California at Los Angeles, and she served in a leadership role at Whitman during her husband's presidency. The endowment allows the economics department to bring a distinguished economist to campus to enrich the study of economics here at Whitman, and this year we are very fortunate to have been able to bring Bob Frank. So please join me in welcoming Robert H.
Thank you very much, David, for that generous introduction. I'm delighted to get a chance to visit Walla Walla. I've never been here before. Ithaca is a similar town. It also has 30,000 people roughly, so it's a similar size to Walla Walla. My wife is a city councilwoman in Ithaca, and I'm going to tell her about what a delightful downtown and surrounding area. I think I really wandering around today. I think you're all very lucky to be in a nice environment like this. What I want to do is start by sort of promising you something that you'll judge to be implausible at the outset. I'm going to describe a simple set of policy changes that we could make that would liberate $2 trillion a year of additional resources that could be used for repairing roads with potholes, bridges that are collapsing, schools whose roofs leak, water systems that fail, all the failing infrastructure you've read about, and have more than enough left over to pay down mounting government debt and still attend to the task of building a few high-speed trains and all the rest, all without anybody having to give up anything of significant value. It sounds like a snake oil claim. I hope you recognize that it's an implausible sounding claim, but I'll try to explain why we could do exactly that. And the argument doesn't require any heroic assumptions. I think most of you probably believe already every assumption that I'm going to have to make to outline the mechanism that would achieve these results. So let me just try to do that. The argument rests on a very simple observation. The book that David mentioned, my most recent book, is called The Darwin Economy. In it, I try to defend another implausible sounding claim, which is that in 100 years' time, if we were to ask professional economists, people like David Toomey, who's the founder of your discipline? If you asked us these days to answer that question, probably 99% of us would say without any hesitation, Adam Smith, of course. Why are you asking such a stupid question as that? My prediction is that in 100 years' time, if we ask the same question of economists in universities and in other professional settings, a plurality, maybe not 99%, but a plurality will respond to that question by saying Charles Darwin. And of course that sounds preposterous because Darwin wasn't even an economist. He never took a course in economics, but he was influenced by economists. He read Thomas Malthus, David Ricardo mostly. They in turn had studied with Adam Smith, and so you could say, in the end, if I'm right, at least Adam Smith will be the great-grandfather of economics. He won't lose his place of pride in the history of the discipline for sure. I'm a great admirer of Adam Smith's, but I think we will come to see Darwin as the man who first really revealed the nature of the competitive process and how it steers resources either for the good of individuals on the one hand or for the good of society on the other. I'm distressed that more students don't graduate from college with a deep appreciation of Adam Smith's invisible hand argument. I hope you all at least know what it is. I think it will endure as one of the crowning intellectual achievements of humankind. The story was quite simple. It was that producers are looking to feather their own nests when they introduce cost-saving innovations or product design improvements. They're not trying to help society. So it was the invisible hand notion that people seeking their own ends, just selfish pursuit of their own goals, would somehow be led, as if by an invisible hand, to promote the ends of society as a whole. And so the story, when it plays out, is really quite extraordinary. So the entrepreneur introduces a cost-saving innovation, not to help society, but to steal market share from his rivals. That's the only reason he does it. I think many people before Smith saw that. What people before Smith didn't see so clearly was the dynamic that first step would set in motion. So if you're a rival producer and one of your competing firms introduces a cost-saving innovation, your impulse isn't to sit idly by and watch him steal your market. You say, what can I do about this? And typically the response is, I'm going to copy his innovation as fast as I can. If it's protected by a patent, then I'll get as close as I can to the patent without breaking the law, and I'll somehow manage to maintain my position in the market by responding quickly and aggressively in that way. When all producers who've been threatened by the innovation respond in that fashion, the resulting increase in competition sets in motion a process that drives the price of the product down to the new lower cost of production. So when the dust settles from that process, all the churning is done, who's the beneficiary? Not the firms who introduce the cost-saving innovations. They compete their advantage down to the cost of production, and it's the consumer who ends up reaping the benefits of that. You know, cheaper, better products in a sequence all through history because of the competitive efforts of rival firms trying to steal business from one another for their own selfish purposes. That's a pretty amazing story. You don't need a government bureaucracy to manage it. It all just happens from people trying to pursue their own ends. So give Smith full credit. I was very distressed that many of the reviewers of my book mistook me as somebody who didn't appreciate Smith's achievement. On the contrary, I think I'm one of the deepest admirers of Adam Smith. But I think what Smith's analysis overlooks, and really Smith is not at fault here, it's more the modern day disciples of Adam Smith, who I think claimed much more for the invisible hand than he ever did. They say, the modern day free marketeers say, all you need to do is get government out of the way. Set selfish people loose in the unfettered marketplace and we'll get the best of all possible results emerging from that dynamic. Smith didn't say that. Smith was actually quite circumspect about the invisible hand. In his eye, it was remarkable that you sometimes got great results from the selfish efforts of individuals. It wasn't his claim that he always did. And he recognized many exceptions. He was quite leery, as a matter of fact, of entrepreneurs with excessive market power. He thought the powerful actors on the scene would exploit workers when they could. They would exploit consumers when they could. They would try to drive rivals out of business and then raise prices once they had a corner on the market. So he was very much, ironically, like a typical left-wing critic of capitalism that we see today. He was worried about monopoly and exploitation and all those things. Those aren't the problems, I'm going to try to persuade you. There are monopolies out there, yes, but way fewer than in Smith's day. If there's ever a customer who's now underserved by existing firms, it's easier than ever before for rival firms to figure out that there's a poorly served consumer somewhere and get a better product into that consumer's frame of vision in a hurry. That process plays out much more rapidly now than in Smith's day. So I don't think the main worry about the market system is monopoly. One exception I'll note is that we now have to worry much more than in Smith's day about market sources of wealth buying political favors from the government. This lecture is taking place in Olin Hall. I don't know if you know the history of the Olin Foundation, but it gave hundreds of millions of dollars to training programs that would train people to think that if you just turn people loose and let markets play out according to their own whims, we'll get the best possible results in society as a whole. That's not the case, but people have been told that again and again, first by the Koch family, by the Olin family, now by the Koch brothers. Their foundations are delivering hundreds of millions of dollars to promulgate the same message. The Mellon Skate family spent hundreds of millions of dollars on the same thing. There's this very highly funded message machine that's saying, just leave markets alone, they can do the best possible. Darwin's view was different from that. Darwin saw that competition often played out exactly the way Adam Smith had envisioned in his invisible hand argument, but not always. So take first an example of the former story. The keen eyesight of the hawk. Why does the hawk see so well? If there were a phone book page on the back wall there with numbers and names in 6-point type, a hawk where I'm standing here could read the numbers off that page, if it could read at all. It was all the images. How did they get to see so well? Well, hawks make their living by flying 3,000 feet above the valley floor, looking for small rodents to swoop down on and catch and feed to their offspring. If there were a mutation that coded for a lens and an eye that could resolve images a little bit more clearly, that would have been extremely extremely beneficial for the individual animal in which the mutation occurred. He would have caught more mice, he would have left more offspring, the mutation would have spread, and another mutation would occur, the mutations would accrete generation upon generation, and now we've got these magnificent hawks who can see better than any other creatures. That's a mutation that helped the individual hawk survive, to be sure, and it was one also that helped hawks as a group do well against other species. It was exactly an invisible hand product design improvement story. It was exactly parallel to that story. So Darwin saw that. That was, he thought, perhaps even the norm in evolution by natural selection. But he also realized that there were important conflicts between the interests of the individual in passing on its genes to the next generation and the interests of larger groups to which the individual belonged. Think, for example, about the massive antlers of the bull elk. You've seen the photos of them. The antlers in the surviving members of the species in males span 4 feet across. They're huge. They weigh 40 pounds and up. Why are they so big? Darwin's explanation was fairly simple, and to my ear, quite persuasive. He said, well, bull elk, like males in most other vertebrate species, are polygynous. Meaning what? Meaning that they take more than one mate if they can. And you have to stress the qualifier, because if some take more than one mate, that means others don't get any mates at all, which makes them the ultimate losers in the Darwinian scheme of things. So if you're a male, you want to take more than one mate, all the other males want to do that too. What do? You fight with one another for access to females. That's the standard way that conflict is resolved. And so in the case of the bull elk, the antlers were the weaponry that decided those battles. If you had bigger antlers than your rival, you'd be more likely to win your fight. So mutation occurs, some stray protein gets hit by a gamma ray, and the codes for N equals 100 rather than N equals 80, and the antlers grow a little bit bigger. That antler rack helps the bearer of it beat the other males with whom he fights, and so he leaves many more copies of the mutation codes for larger antlers. The mutations accrete one upon another, and so in the end, we get the massive antlers of the bull elk that we see today, 4 feet across, 40 pounds. When the book came out, I was excited to see one of the first reviews of it appeared in Slate magazine, and there was a nice picture of Charles Darwin. I thought, oh, great. And then I saw the title of the review, it was The Darwin Economy, and the subtitle of the review caught me off guard. It was What the Darwin Economy Gets Wrong About Evolution. And I thought, oh no, did I make some fundamental error in the argument? I'd shown it to a bunch of biologists, nobody complained about anything. What was the problem? The reviewer, one John Whitfield, a UK science writer, who should have known better, said, well, if big antlers were problematic from the point of view of bull elk, natural selection would have long since weeded out any males that had trouble because they're big antlers. The downside of big antlers, of course, is they make you less mobile. They're fine for winning fights with other males, but if you're chased in the woods by wolves, you're easily surrounded and killed. You can't easily maneuver. So he thought I'd made the mistake of not realizing that if a bull's antlers got too big, they'd be weeded out by natural selection. Well, of course they would be. That's not the point. The point is that the antlers are too big from the perspective of males. Natural selection would weed out a male whose antlers were so big that he was more likely to die at a sufficiently high rate as to compensate for the advantage he would have in fighting with other males. We don't see bulls with antlers that are 40 feet across and that weigh 400 pounds. An animal with antlers like that would never get his nose off the turf, much less compete successfully for mates or food or any other resource. So yes, natural selection does limit the size of antlers, but the equilibrium is one in which antlers are too big from the point of view of males. It's a very simple point. If all the antlers were smaller by half, suppose you gave bulls a chance to vote on that. At the count of 3, your hoof stands on the red button and all antlers shrink by half. They would have compellingly powerful reasons to push the red button because the same fights would be resolved in exactly the same way as before, since it's just antler size in relative terms that matters. And they'd be less likely to be killed by wolves if they were chased into wooded areas. So the antlers are too big from the point of view of humans. That's the simple example. That example is rewritten thousands of times in ordinary market settings. Suppose you're a merchant and you're building a sign on a highway trying to attract business for your customers for your business. What's your goal? You want your sign to be noticed by passing motorists. Well, what must be true of the sign in order for it to succeed at that? It's got to stand out relative to the other signs that are competing for motorists' attention. And what that means, it's got to be taller, it's got to stick out over the street farther. If the signs are illuminated, it has to have more candle power than the competing signs. It's relative sign conspicuousness that attracts attention. And so when you drive along a strip mall, I didn't see any in your town today. Pat yourselves lucky that the zoning laws have made it illegal for merchants to build signs of the type that we see in unzoned strips. The visual cacophony that's characteristic of those kinds of commercial strips is not a reflection of the fact that merchants have no aesthetic sense. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But their goal isn't to produce an aesthetically pleasing landscape. Their goal is to attract your attention when you're driving by. And to do that, they need a sign that's bigger than the other signs. And so you get an equilibrium, not with signs 1,000,000 feet tall, no, but with signs that are too tall and too bright and too far hanging out over the roadway to be a pleasing visual scene. That was Darwin's insight. Individual traits are molded by natural selection insofar as they promote the reproductive interests of individual animals. Sometimes they help the group, other times they're completely at odds with the interests of the group. And case by case, you just have to think about which situation you're in. And when you're in a situation in which the individual interests and the group interests are in conflict, it makes no sense whatsoever to rely on the invisible hand. The invisible hand in those situations produces incredibly wasteful arms races. That's the general proposition that comes out of the analysis. 3 weeks ago, NPR ran a segment about the Porcefillo preschool. It's a academy that caters to 3-year-old children in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It's in a brand new IMP design glass building in a leafy enclave near Columbia University. And Guy Raz, the host of All Things Considered, goes and visits. I don't know how many of you heard this segment. It was quite amazing when I heard it. He goes to visit the campus. He's greeted by the headmaster, Dr. Rebecca Usin is her name. She shows him through gleaming computer labs. The 3-year-olds are learning C++. She describes to him with great pride the Mandarin Chinese immersion program that the 3-year-olds are engaged in. But the real punchline of the segment is that we learned shortly thereafter that Dr. Unsin is a pediatric neurologist, and she's been hired for the specific purpose that she's an expert at dealing with the new requirement of all applicants to the Porcefillo Preschool Academy, which is a DNA profile. They've got 12,000 applicants for their 32 slots for the 2012 class, and they're going to screen them by looking at their DNA profile. So Dr. Unsin says to Guy Raz, we can now examine the DNA profile and tell whether a 3-year-old will end up at Yale University or Yonkers Community College. So it's a totally preposterous claim if you know anything about DNA profiles. They're nowhere close to being able to make any prediction like that. But the amazing thing was, it was an April Fool's segment. It was a segment that had been produced just to catch people off guard, and tons of people took it seriously. I did some research on the web, and I found countless websites reacting with outrage about the news about the Porcefillo Preschool Academy. They described one couple who, when the wife was 24 weeks pregnant, went to the hospital, had blood drawn, so that the DNA profile could be constructed in time for her to apply this year for the class of 2015. Porcefillo preschool parents don't mind that kind of thing, the website said. Well, this is exactly emblematic of the conflict between individual interest and group interest. Individual interest steers people in a socially benign way much of the time, but not in some domains. Education is a particular domain where it doesn't work, because what people in many corners of the educational domain, what they really want is a spot at the top of some very exclusive hierarchy. They want to get their kids into an exclusive preschool. Well, this just in. There are only 1% of slots in the top 1% of any hierarchy. So the more you want to get your kid in, the more you pay, the more hoops you're willing to jump through, but there's still only 1% of the slots in the top 1%. The tuitions in many of the actual preschool academies in New York are many of them over $30,000 a year. That's one next fall that's going to be charging $39,350 each. That's just the beginning. There's huge excess demand even at those prices, and so your kid gets in or not so much according to whether you're willing to pay the tuition. There are plenty of centimillionaires willing to pay the high tuition. But according to how big a donation are you willing to give to the school's endowment. And there are all sorts of interesting tales of Byzantine conspiracies involving seven-figure side payments to get kids into preschools in New York and other big cities. But basically, the invisible hand isn't working on behalf of the rich people in those situations. It's just a vehicle that enables them to squander their money to no end whatsoever. Basically, they're spending millions of dollars on slots that they could have gotten for the same amount that people here, I'm guessing, pay for good preschool spots, which is, what, 6,000, 4,000, 3,000, somewhat smaller. So individual interest and group interest don't coincide. One of the most vivid examples that I first encountered of that general truth was by the economist Tom Schelling. He's one of my intellectual heroes for many decades. He won the Nobel Prize in 2006. The committee didn't cite the work for which I think he'll eventually become most well known. The example I'm thinking of is from a 1978 book called Micromotives and Macro Behavior, which, as you can tell from the title, is talking about the conflict between the individual's interests and society's interests. And he talks about the example of hockey players and helmet rules. So he's a longtime hockey fan. He watched the Bruins on TV in Boston for decades when he was a faculty member at Harvard. And what he noticed was this, that back in the day, before hockey helmets were required, no players voluntarily would wear them. They would all skate bareheaded. Go back and look at some of the old photographs on Google of hockey players from the 1940s and 50s. None of them were wearing helmets. Goalies didn't wear helmets, if you can imagine. The puck's coming right at you, 115 miles an hour. Goalies had no teeth in those days. And often they suffered severe brain injuries shortly into their careers. So they don't wear helmets when they're given a choice, but then, Schelling noted, if you give them a choice to vote on the matter, they vote unanimously for a rule requiring themselves to wear helmets. Well, what's going on, he says, if helmets are so great, why don't you just wear them? Why do you need a rule? And his answer captured the essence of the same argument I made. If you take your helmet off, you get an edge. You can see better, you can hear better, maybe you can intimidate your opponents more easily because you're dumb enough to skate without a helmet. They're going to give you a slightly wider berth. So you get an edge. If you've ever been a competitive athlete, you know that's what it's all about, is getting an edge. So if you take your helmet off and get an edge, you think your opponent is going to sit idly by, no more than the rival firm would sit idly by when the first firm introduces a cost-saving innovation. He's going to take his helmet off too. And then when the dust settles, the equilibrium is one in which no hockey player is wearing a helmet. Well, that's not so great. We're all at risk of serious brain injury and nobody's got a competitive edge here. What's the solution? It's not to post a notice in the locker room saying, caution, skating without a helmet could lead to serious injury. They know that. They're not stupid. They know that. That's not the problem. The problem is they can't wear their helmets if the other side doesn't wear theirs. And so they need a rule. You have to act collectively to solve that problem. That's a very serious challenge to the libertarians' notion, naive notion, let me say, of freedom. Suppose the libertarian says, I object to that rule. It robs hockey players of the right to decide for themselves whether to wear a helmet or not. Well, yes, it does, as a matter of fact, but that's the whole point of the rule. Namely, that they want to deny themselves the right to decide individually whether to wear a helmet, because they know if they have that right, they'll end up skating without a helmet to no end. They'll just be vulnerable to injury, and they won't get anything in return for it. So, if they all vote unanimously for a rule requiring helmets, in what sense can that rule be said to violate their freedom? Suppose we thought about a military arms race. Two nations equally matched. Possibility exists to verify an arms control agreement. They sign one. We won't build bombs more than the amount we have now. You won't build bombs more than the amount we have now. So a libertarian objects. That robs individual nations their freedom to decide for themselves how many bombs to build. What a dumb objection. That's the whole point of the agreement. They know that if they have the right to decide that for themselves, they'll build too many bombs. We build more bombs. They build more bombs. We build still more. They build still more. The balance of security is unaffected by us all building more bombs together, and we, in the meantime, have no money left to build schools and hospitals. Wouldn't it be better to build fewer bombs? Where arms control agreements are enforceable, that's what, and the antagonists are equally matched. That's quickly the conclusion that they come to. So the objection that it robs you of your freedom is just a misunderstanding of the whole notion that sometimes individual and group interests are in conflict. The elk, if they could, would want to restrict the freedom of their antlers to grow so big, but they can't. They're stuck. We're not stuck. We can do all sorts of things to attenuate the conflict between individuals and groups. Think about in the educational domain, one to my eye, compelling example. It's the example I call kindergarten redshirting. I use the term after the similar practice in college athletics. The athletic department will hold a freshman out of competition during his freshman year. Why? So that he'll still have 4 years of eligibility left, and that in each of those years he'll be bigger, stronger, faster, more experienced than he would have been if he competed this year. And so it's an advantage for our side if we do that. What if the other side doesn't? Then we just get older athletes. No gain. But there are no effective rules against that practice. But think about the analogy in the kindergarten domain. My kid's getting ready to start kindergarten. He's going to turn 6 in October. And I think to myself, well, I've got higher goals for my kid. I'm going to hold him back a year. He'll be bigger, he'll be stronger, he'll be more emotionally mature. And since school is great on the curve, every year thereafter he's going to do better than he would have done if I let him start this year. And so he's more likely to get into a selective university. That's a pretty attractive lure for a parent who's ambitious. What's the rub? The rub is other parents can do that too. And if everybody does it, no child performs better in relative terms. We get get 7-year-old kindergartners. That's what we get. And then somebody holds the kid back another year, 8-year-old kindergartners. That might pay, even so. At some point, there'd be an equilibrium. I don't know, 11, 12, 13-year-old kindergartners. But it wouldn't go on forever. It wouldn't make, at some point, say, oh, the hell with it, I'm going to send it this year. But is that efficient? It's completely wasteful to do that. It's mutually offsetting. You're competing for a scarce slot in the hierarchy. I'm competing for a scarce slot. We each fire off salvos at one another. The rounds we fire off each other are mutually offsetting, and they're hence essentially wasteful. So parents, I think, have very good reason to be happy that the laws in almost every jurisdiction in the country take that decision out of their hands. If your kid turns 6 by December 1st, he starts kindergarten that year. Full stop. You don't like it? Tough. Bring a note from your psychiatrist saying he's disabled in some way. And then you'll live with that stigma, so there's at least a cost. This is not controversial. This is just common sense. Everybody stands up to see better. Nobody sees better than before. I'm not talking about a rocket science insight here. This is just garden variety, evolutionary biology. Sometimes individuals, when they're competing for slots, take mutually offsetting steps that don't do anybody any good in the end, waste a lot of resources. So think about all the things we do that are in that category. Here's where the $2 trillion is going to come from that I told you about at the outset. So do you know how much the average American wedding costs now? It's $30,000. You know how much it cost in 1980? That's not very long ago. It cost $11,000 then. This is inflation-adjusted dollars, so not just that distortion. Why does it cost more now? The reason, I think, is very simple. It's that people at the top of the pyramid have gotten all the income gains for the last 3 decades, and they're spending more on everything, including weddings. And if you watch a $5 million wedding, you're not jealous if you're a middle-class family. Oh, that's great. They go to these destinations, and they have helicopters bring people in, and famous bands play, blah, blah, blah. That's cool. Maybe us someday. So you're not angry about that, but there's a group of people just below the very top of the hierarchy. They travel in the same social circles. Now, if that's the standard for weddings in their circle, they've got to spend more. So they spend more. Then there's a group that overlaps with them. They spend more. And that's why weddings cost $30,000 now, not $11,000. Does anybody think people are happier getting married today than they were when weddings cost only $11,000? You're nuts if you think that. You're dreaming if you think that. What possible explanation could you offer for that claim? It's preposterous. But they're starting off with $30,000 worth of debt, which is a terrible thing if you're just trying to build a life yourself and you have payments to make on a debt like that, or your parents are struggling in retirement because they felt they needed to do that. It's the same with coming-of-age parties. The CEO in New York spent $10 million on a coming-of-age party for his daughter a few years back. Hired 50 Cent to perform. 300 of her closest friends came to the Rainbow Room at Rockefeller Center. They all got an iPhone as a party gift. Well, be terrible. Suppose his only aim was to create a special occasion for his daughter. Fine, a special occasion. That's an inescapably relative concept. It's an occasion that's more special than what we expect. And so if you're in that league, you got to spend a lot of money for your occasion to stand out and seem special to people. So others now have to spend more in that circle, and then people below them are spending more. And when I was at NYU a couple of years ago on sabbatical, I noticed one day walking back from my office to my apartment, there was a clown in full costume going into one of the faculty apartment buildings. I heard, what can this be? Have they started hiring clowns on the faculty? No. I realized immediately that it was an NYU faculty member's 10-year-old must be having a birthday that day. And his parents knew that if they didn't hire a clowns when I was 10. Nobody was disappointed then. You know, what did we do? I mean, you would probably think it was stupid what we did then, but it was fine for us. You know, a lot of this is real spinning. And the biggest one is in housing. So CEOs have more money, they build bigger mansions. The people just below them travel the same sort of circle. They need to build bigger too, maybe now need a ballroom because it's the custom for your daughter to get married at home. So you build bigger. Then the people just below them, they see the bigger houses in their circle, and they build bigger too. Maybe need a dining room big enough for dinner for 24, not 18. They build bigger. So on, all the way down the ladder. If you don't invoke a cascade of that sort, there's no way to explain why the median new house built in the U.S. in 2007 was 50% bigger than its counterpart 30 years earlier. The median earner doesn't have more money now. The median wage in real terms is actually lower than 2007. Why are they building bigger houses then? Because others like them are building bigger houses. Well, you could say, pull yourself together, man. You can't afford it. Don't build that big a house. But here's the rub. It's I think the most important line in the whole argument, which is that if you spend less than people like you on housing, your kids are going to go to crummy schools. Suppose you're the median earner. You want your kids to go to the best possible schools. Well, does anyone not realize that the good schools are located in the more expensive neighborhoods? They are in every country. So if you want to send your kid to an average quality school, one right in the middle of the distribution, you got to outbid 50% of all of the parents for a house served by such a school. And if you don't do that, then it's your kids who will go to a school where they have metal detectors out in front, where the other students score on average in the 20th percentile reading that. No parent wants to live with that. So they borrow, they work longer hours, they commute longer, they do whatever they can to scrape together the money they need to buy the house in the best possible schools. And then they end up in debt and struggling. That's where the middle class squeeze has come from. It's been from the inequality increase that we've seen and the pressure that that's put on people because individuals' goals can't be achieved in a vacuum. My ability to achieve my goals depends on how much you spend. So here's the lever that we could pull. My proposal is scrap the income tax altogether. In its place, adopt a much more steeply progressive tax on the family's annual consumption. So here's how it would work. You'd report your income to the IRS just as you do now, maybe even in much simplified form. If we could get the Congress to act, it would be great to strip out a lot of the exemptions and loopholes. But report your income. Also, report how much you save during the year. People know how to do that from having participated in 401k plans and similar tax-exempt retirement plans. The difference between those two numbers, your income minus your savings, that's how much you spent during the year. So that amount, minus the big standard deduction, let's say $30,000 for a family of 4, would be your taxable consumption. The tax rate would start off very low if the number was small. And then as the number grew larger and larger, the tax rate on the next dollar would rise, and it could rise far beyond where we would think it prudent to rise under the current income tax structure. So let's suppose that if you're already consuming $5 million a year, the tax on the next dollar you spend is 100%. We can never tax income at 100%. Why would I work if you're going to take every cent I make in the next hour? The hell with you, I'm not working. But if you say the consumption tax 100%, that just means if I want to spend an extra dollar, okay, I can, but I got to pay an extra dollar in tax. So think about how that incentive affects a person's decision about how big an addition to build onto his addition. I'm sitting there, I'm a rich guy, I'm spending $5 million a year, I face 100% marginal tax rate on consumption. I'm thinking about building a $2 million addition onto my mansion. Then Frank comes along with his progressive consumption tax. That's going to cost me $4 million now. $2 million for the addition, $2 million for the tax. And so what am I going to do? A lot of people say, well, if you're a rich guy, you'll just do whatever you want. It doesn't matter what things cost, you can afford it. No, that's not what the rich do at all. If you look at the dwellings that the rich live in New York City, where there are many more rich people than any other place on the planet, they're much smaller on the average than in Dallas, or than in almost any other American city. Why are they so much smaller? Not because the rich can't afford to build bigger, they can't, but because price per square foot in New York is higher than anywhere else in the nation, and they respond by building smaller. So if I'm a rich guy and there's this tax area, I'm going to build a smaller addition on my mansion. Not $2 million addition, a $1 million addition. Then with the tax, it costs me no more than I'm planning to spend. Here's the magic step. If we all knew that, all of us who were thinking about building additions on our mansions, the new smaller additions serve us just as well, I would argue better, than the bigger ones would have served us. Why? Because beyond some point, it's only relative mansion size that matters. I say better because it's my belief that if we can actually do the relevant experiment, we would discover that if all rich people had mansions twice as big as the ones they have now, they'd be less happy than before. What a hassle it is to manage a property of that size. All the staff you have to recruit and train, all the tell-all memoirs you have to contend with. It would be easier if we all had smaller mansions. 30,000 square feet, that's pretty big. You don't need 60,000 square feet. So if we squeezed people's incentives by just put that in a tax sheltered investment account, don't spend it on a coming of age party or a mansion, that would be better for everybody. Some people would continue to spend, we'd get tax revenue to fix the bridges and the schools and pay down debt. Others would say, I'm going to put it in a tax sheltered investment account, and the country would grow faster, wages would rise more rapidly, and so on. So that's the fiscal magic I promised you at the outset. And it's all a consequence of the fact that individual incentives and group incentives don't. So that's the pitch. Do we have time? I'm glad to take questions if there's additional time left in the session. But I know it was a nice evening out there when we came up. I thought, no, surely no one will come tonight. So we're going to play Frisbee. So I'm grateful that you took time out to come and hear me. And again, happy to have a chance to share something. Don't be shy.
So you said they're just I'm just looking at tax revenue, but it'd be kind of far-fetched to say it's going to be the same, right?
It depends on what the rates are and how much tax revenue you'll raise. If you're not sure how it'll work, one way you can start, and this has been recommended by my friend Larry Seidman, the economist at Delaware, it says, let the first salvo in this policy be a progressive consumption surtax levied only on families who earn $1 million a year or more. So they pay their income tax, and we all pay our income tax, same as before. Those families pay a progressive consumption surtax on top of it. So we'll see how they respond, and we'll get some data, and then we can gradually extend the threshold for where that kicks in and replace the income tax. I should also say it would be better if we didn't do this tomorrow, because we don't want to. We're in a recession still. Let's face it. The unemployment rate's 8.3%, 8.2%. It's a lingering downturn. We should not be choking off any kind of spending right now. If people invested more now, put more money into savings, normally, when the economy's at full point, that would be steered into additional investment. People would take the savings and borrow it to do research and development or build factories or whatever it might be. When the economy is sputtering along like it is now, they won't invest it. It'll just sit there. Corporations are sitting on tons of cash right now. They could be investing. They just don't need to invest it. People aren't there to buy what they can produce with their existing capacity. So what I would recommend doing, apart from the surtax aspect, is just announce today, let the Congress vote today, or tomorrow, I guess now, since it's 8 o'clock in the evening. Let them vote tomorrow to adopt this tax and then phase it in gradually once the economy is back under 6% unemployment. So very gradual phase in, only that that would kill several birds with one stone, actually. You'd reassure the people who are worried about deficits, well, we're committed to a new revenue stream, we're going to get this problem under control. Not now, when we shouldn't be reducing spending, but when the time is right, we're going to go after additional revenue. And it would also stimulate an avalanche of additional spending right away without the government having to borrow a nickel. And that's because people would see the tax coming. Oh, we're going to build a mansion addition. When's the right time to do that? After the tax takes effect or right now, before? I think there's an easy answer to that question. So I would expect to see a huge outpouring of expenditure if we passed the law in the way I just suggested.
So I was wondering why how does progressive consumption tax be better than more progressive income tax, in light of the fact that the income tax for the most wealthy individuals has decreased, as we were alluding to before, in the last 30 years. If I read correctly, it was 70% in 1980, and it's now 35%. So I was wondering why this consumption tax replacing income tax would be better than simply making the income tax more progressive.
If you told me you can make the income tax more progressive or nothing, I would vote for a more progressive income tax without any hesitation whatsoever. It's just that if you tax income, you're taxing consumption and savings. Income is consumption plus savings. And why should you tax good things? We don't have enough savings. Why should we discourage savings? That limits the amount we can tax income because we're fearful we'll discourage savings. There's no need to worry about that if you tax consumption. So yeah, I think a more progressive income tax would be an acceptable step to take if there weren't that other option available. Most countries have much more progressive income taxes than we do. You'll hear it said that, well, the job creators will stop working if we have a more progressive income tax. Where is there any evidence at all for that? You know, the tax rates, as you point out, were 70% not too long ago, and people were struggling like mad to move up the promotion ladder then. And in other countries where tax rates are higher, that's the same way it is now. So yeah, we could do it.
Would you advocate similar taxes and additional ones to push the line on what seem to be like parasitic business expenses, like your earlier example of advertising, or maybe something like litigation at a certain point?
Great question. You know, once you see the pattern that generates waste, it's mutually offsetting rounds fired off in an arms race, then there are all sorts of other possibilities. So you think about advertising expenditures. You wouldn't want to say companies can't advertise. You know, if somebody comes up with a revolutionary product, you'd want them to be able to tell people about it. But if you taxed advertising, that would discourage advertising. And what we know from many studies is that most advertising is just mutually offsetting. It's a battle for market share. When the Congress outlawed advertising tobacco on television, tobacco industry profits shot up the next year. They were delighted not to be allowed to waste their money on television ads.
I had a question going back to the first one.
Yeah.
Like, I understand your reasoning, don't implement it today because we want to spend
Right.
more. What, in a hypothetical world, if we implement this new tax system and then there's no income tax and another recession comes along, what's the response to that?
Yeah, very good question. So the consumption tax is one that discourages consumption and encourages investment. And during a recession, people don't want to invest. So wouldn't this tax make recessions worse? I mean, I take that to be your question.
Sure, yeah.
And it's a great question, and fortunately there's a good answer to it, which is that if you did run into a recession and you had this tax on the books, you would have a vastly more powerful weapon against recession than you have now. Right now, when we have recession, we give people a temporary income tax, hoping that they'll spend it. And most people take it and save a good chunk of it because they're fearful about the future. So temporary income taxes don't have much of a stimulative effect on immigration. They have some stimulus effect, but it's greatly blunted by the fact that a large proportion of any temporary income tax would be saved. What if you had a temporary consumption tax holiday? All right, anything you buy in the next 3 months, no consumption tax. you don't get any advantage at all from that offer unless you go out and spend like a drunken sailor. So yeah, I think it gives us a way more powerful weapon against recession if recession occurs, which of course it could at any time. We thought there were things in the past.
The question to you is about tax evasion and sales tax levels above 10%. So if you're taxing consumption at 100%, is tax evasion going to be an issue at all?
People will evade taxes when they think they can get away with it, sure. You know, think about how the tax is structured. You have to report your income the same as now, so there's no additional possibilities for evasion on that front. You have to report your savings, which families already do for tax-exempt retirement accounts like 401ks and the like. So, you know, we know how to do that. We would have to police all that, of course. So yeah, there would be some enforcement, but you know, that's anytime you have a tax system, you need an enforcement mechanism. If you say we're going to have taxes to be completely voluntary from now on, you won't get any taxes. You know, you have to actually watch people and make sure they don't cheat, and then you pay the taxes.
So it seems like the assumption you're criticizing is the thought by some people that all forms of consumption are beneficial. You know, everything is a hotbed. It also seems like a broad assumption in this progressive consumption taxes are making is that all forms of consumption past a certain level are a moose example, you know, large quantities. Does this blot out any kinds of large consumption that would have been super beneficial?
Yeah, it's a good question. If you had a perfect world, you would want to tax each individual consumption item in exact proportion to its positionality. You know, the information load of implementing a policy like that would be totally forbidding in the future, never mind today. We wouldn't have a clue about it. And wherever societies tried to tax specific goods that they thought were wasteful, that's always been a disaster. So we taxed boats, expensive cars, and airplanes back in the early 90s. So what did people do? They went and bought boats offshore, which were taxed. They used to outlaw gold buttons in the Middle Ages. Well, people switched to fancy carved ivory buttons. You know. The nice thing about the progressive expenditure tax is that no bureaucrat has to make any judgment about whether a specific good is wasteful or not. All it really assumes, since the tax has the really big bite when the rates get high, above, let's say, $2 million a year of consumption, is that the next dollar you're spending, if you're already spending $2 million, isn't on anything particularly urgent. And, you know, I don't know if that's true or not. One thing you could say is, well, the consumption at the top is the leading edge, and that the technology that drives it filters down to people below. So, you know, there are definitely some huge advantages from the luxury consumption domain. But the nice thing about this tax is that by encouraging more investment, it would make income grow faster over time. And so, even though the proportion of income that we consume would be smaller under this regime, the absolute amount of consumption at some point will be higher. 80% of a big number is bigger than 95% of a smaller one. So I think I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's not perfect. I mean, you're on the right track with the question, but I think even though it's not perfect, it's not so bad. It's working.
How would a tax on consumption be differentiated from like a sales tax?
Yeah, the sales tax is also a consumption tax. It's a value-added tax, or sales tax, though, is the same proportion everybody pays on every dollar he or she spends. This one is a progressive tax. You pay a very high rate on the next dollar if you're spending already a large amount of money. The problem with the sales tax is that it hits the poor disproportionately. They save a very small fraction of their income compared to the rich, so they would be paying a much bigger fraction of their income in taxes under the sales tax. The rich, in contrast, would pay a lower fraction of their income in taxes, and so you get an even more intense expenditure cascade. The coming of age parties would get even more expensive.
You started off your talk tonight talking about the Olins and the Mellons and the Cokes How do you get over the power of the advocacy lobby?
Yeah,
An accountant would be put out by the
It's a very difficult issue. I mean, especially with Citizens United decision from the Supreme Court last year. I think it's very difficult to rein in the influence of cold cash on the political messages people get bombarded with. And they have an effect. There's no doubt about the fact that these messages distort what people think. Hearing something over and over again that you know to be false changes your mind about what's going on. That's just the way the human brain is. If you hear something once, well, you don't pay any attention to it. If you hear it twice, well, your ear pricks up a little bit. Hey, maybe that's something I need to pay attention to. If you hear it 3 or 4 times, wow, that's got to be important. I better listen carefully to that. And then even if you know it's false, the fact that you hear it over and over again, you don't hear very many things in the natural environment over and over again if they're false. The false things get weeded out more and more reliable. Does anybody do like me? I set my watch 5 minutes ahead. I do that because I know from experience that it gets me there on time more reliably. Somebody asks me, what time is it? I'll immediately do X minus 5 before I speak. My watch says 8:10. Ask me what time it is, I'll say 5 after. I'm smart, I can do that. You can do that. I know what time it is, but still, the fact that my watch says 8:10, I'm more likely to get there on time. Why? I have a neuroscientist colleague, I tried this out on her too, maybe. I said, look, the image I see on my watch face gets into my brain through multiple neural pathways. One of them goes through the part of the brain that does X minus 5, and that part of the brain isn't fooled one bit by the image. But then what about the nerve that goes directly into the hippocampus and creates a knot of anxiety because I knew I was supposed to be there at this time? That gets me out of my chair. See, I mean, I don't know, but it works for me. It doesn't work for everybody. My wife thinks I'm stupid for setting 5 minutes fast. Why can't I learn to get there on time on my own? I don't know. I do know that if you hear something over and over again, you're more likely to be influenced by it, even if you don't think it's true.
I have two more questions for you. One is that, I guess right now, consumption is about 70% of GDP.
Almost.
So that's going to, I mean, I know you're advocating progressive tax, but still our economy would look very different if a progressive tax.
China consumes about 45% of its GDP, and it's been growing very rapidly.
No, I know. I mean, we would be maybe more manufacturing based or service based or something like that. But so my question is, that's obviously there's going to be some transition time there. Which
if you phase this tax in gradually, what would happen would be at the margin. The same dollars that would have gone into financing more expensive parties and bigger mansions would instead go to tax-sheltered accounts. So consumption is no longer 70% of GDP, it's 69% of GDP. Now there's 31% in the investment accounts. So then the bankers look for the best business plans, they loan that money out, and 31% of GDP gets spent building factories and VATs and computers and other things in the investment sphere, and there's the same spending as before, and it's total spending, not consumption, that governs employment, so there wouldn't be any worry about whether there'd be enough to put people to work there. That base is covered. And then the next year, there'd be a bigger capital stock, so productivity would be higher, incomes would be higher. We could by saving even the same proportion of incomes before, have a bigger contribution to the capital stock next year, and we'd be off on a different trajectory.
The second part of my question is that consumption has, if you look at, for example, the productivity gains in the 90s, a lot of it was driven by the personal computer.
Yeah.
And you could argue that was one of those goods that, I remember in the 80s, my parents bought their first computer for something like $8,000 or so.
Yeah.
Which is crazy back then. Now, everybody can have a smartphone for practically nothing. So a lot of consumption has driven a lot of...
Oh, I completely agree. And you look at cars. I mean, I read an an article in Motor Trend about a year ago. This guy had driven a 25-mile stretch of the Coast Highway along the California Route 1. It's a famous stretch with a lot of hairpin turns. In his Triumph TR6, and he kept a log and how long it took him and everything. Then he went back last year, after 20-odd years had elapsed, and drove the same stretch of highway in his Mazda 3 station wagon. And the time it took him to traverse the same 20-odd miles was about 30% less than in his Triumph sports car, which in the day was an awesome car. So, you know, it's great what's happening. You know, everything's getting better. Have you seen the Louis C.K. segment on YouTube? Life's wonderful and everyone's unhappy. Google Louis C.K. Watch that tonight. People don't appreciate how much better things are now, and it's for just what you say, that people come up with ideas. But if investment increases, that'll make the next idea even better than before. I mean, they're not going to stop wanting to sell us cool things. They're going to say, all right, well now, for the next few years, total consumption will be less than before, but we still got to figure out some way to make them buy stuff. So we're going to take this investment fund we have and cook up something even cooler than before. So yeah, I would, and soon enough, consumption will be higher than before. So that argues the other way.
What would you do with the estate tax?
Oh, very, very good question. Yeah, I mean, the consumption tax would result in rich people dying richer than before. They're the ones who can really take fuller advantage of the savings exemption. Poor people have a hard time saving any money at all. So yeah, that you would need a robust estate tax to make this system work to its maximum capability. If people say we want to abolish the estate tax, why do we want to do that? It's so strange to my way of thinking. It's the best tax we have. You pay it after you're dead. What's the downside? It's like a contingency contract with your lawyer. I'm starting out, I don't know if I'm going to make it big. So sure, yeah, if I'm rich, tax me. In the meantime, build good roads and schools, I'll benefit from that. And then if I end up rich, okay, so that was the deal. Just like my lawyer takes 30% if he wins the that's a good deal. So I think people who think about the estate tax aren't as angry as people who just knee-jerk react to, oh, the death tax, they're killing us.
First, I want to say I really appreciate your hockey reference to sustainable class right now. And I wanted to let you know, you should look into a guy named Greg Tavish. He's one of the last guys who went without a helmet despite the rule. He really had an advantage of being helmetless.
What happened to him? Maybe I don't want to know.
I think he finished out his career in Philadelphia, which is on par with having a brain injury. I'm from there, but yeah. I wanted to ask you though, as you were talking about lobbying and the partisan gridlock that we have and advertising, I was curious. It strikes me that what you're talking about is not purely a problem that belongs to the discipline of economics. So I was curious what you think other disciplines, you know, how they might play a role. Does humanities have a role here, curriculum or other things?
You know, the basic idea is not an inaccessible idea. I think everybody understands the logic of the idea that when everybody stands up, nobody sees better before. Lobbying is a classical example of that kind of thing. So you don't need an economist to point out that doesn't make good sense.
Maybe there should be a freshman writing seminar at Cornell.
Yeah, I'd go for that.
Mr. Frank, you speak of taxing consumers for consuming more. How would this affect corporate expenditure and corporate growth and revenue? Would you consider corporate taxation such as K-1 or?
You know, I'm a tax radical. I say abolish every tax except for taxes on activities that cause harm to others. And corporations, as a general rule, everything they do doesn't cause harm to others. If we didn't have them, you know, we would be poor and living in a much worse state. So I think just tax those things that cause harm to others. CO2. CO2 is going to kill us in 100 years. Tax CO2. We could raise an enormous amount of revenue if we tax CO2. Tax vehicles by weight. Every time you buy a heavier vehicle, you make everyone else on the road more likely to be injured or killed. Why should you get to do that for free? Maybe you need a heavy vehicle, fine. Then buy one, but pay a tax, recognizing that you're imposing costs on others. Tax sodas. Does anybody look back and say, I wish I had drunk more high fructose corn syrup in the last 20 years? They don't cause harm to others necessarily, they cause harm to you, but they cause harm to you in the future. And what we know from the social sciences is that you in the future is an even more separate being than someone else right next to you today. If you drank an extra corn fructose syrup bottle and it would mean that guy next to you is going to get his foot amputated tonight, you wouldn't do it. So if it means you're going to get your foot amputated in 20 years, you know, I'll hell with it. So tax it, make it less attractive. Nobody's going to look back with regret that he drank fewer corn fructose syrup bottles. You do it because it's there, it's tempting. You don't need to do that. So all these things we can tax. Tax them. What's our hard stop time? I'm
Any other questions that anyone has?
Thank you all for